Okay, picture this. You're walking through a museum, and instead of just looking at artifacts, you can actually talk to like a holographic king from ancient Egypt. Or
Yeah.
imagine you're shopping, and you can try on clothes virtually without, dealing with those fitting rooms. That's the world of immersive tech that we're gonna dive into today, and it goes way beyond just games.
It's interesting how immersive tech is becoming a part of our everyday lives in ways that we might not expect. We've moved past just entertainment and academics, and we're seeing real world applications, in retail, tourism, education, even industrial settings.
And we have a ton of research to unpack today, like how augmented reality is changing shopping,
Yeah.
the psychology behind avatars, and even how VR is helping us to understand and design cities.
Yeah, the pandemic really accelerated the adoption of everything virtual. Suddenly, everything had to be online. And that really pushed immersive tech into the mainstream.
It's like the world was finally ready for a technology that was just kind of waiting there. Um, and speaking of tech that's ready for its close-up, let's talk about augmented reality or AR. We're
Yeah.
going beyond those, fun face filters on social media, and we're going to dive into some really interesting applications.
There was a study from Loughborough University that explored how AR is transforming the fashion retail experience. They developed prototypes where shoppers could virtually try on clothes using an app or a smart mirror.
So it's like a virtual fitting room right in your home.
Uh-huh.
No more awkward changing rooms or long queues. I'd be so into that. But did they find that people actually liked using it?
Not only did they like it, but the study found that AR can actually reduce the pressure shoppers often feel. It lets them browse at their own pace, which makes for a more engaging experience that leads to faster but also more informed purchases.
That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes I feel rushed in the store, especially with lines for the fitting rooms. That can really that can affect my decisions.
Mm. And from a brand's perspective, if AR can make for a more satisfying and confident purchase, it could really impact customer loyalty.
Okay, but we can't forget about those AR face filters we were talking about. I mean, they might seem silly, but they're super popular.
Yeah, and their impact might surprise you. Research shows that branded filters are actually often seen as more original and visually appealing than the non-branded ones.
Really, I would have thought it was the other way around. Branded filters always feel kind of like, well, just advertising to me.
It's interesting. Immersive tech often challenges our expectations. Researchers use what they called a process theory approach to look at how our experiences with AR filters, even silly ones, can actually influence our real-world behavior and how we see brands and social media platforms.
Okay, that's pretty fascinating. It makes you think about how these technologies are affecting us, even when we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
Now, let's switch gears to virtual reality or VR. I think most people have a general idea of what it is, but I'm curious to hear your expert take.
So when we talk about VR, we need to consider its three key characteristics: immersion, interactivity, and presence.
Immersion, I get. It's that feeling of being present in the virtual environment. But what about interactivity and presence?
Interactivity is all about being able to actually engage with and manipulate that virtual world, not just passively watch it. So think about reaching out and picking up a virtual object or interacting with a virtual character. And presence is that feeling of actually being there in that virtual space, both physically and emotionally. It's really what sets VR apart.
So it's not just the tech itself, it's about how that tech makes us feel. How does that play into the research on VR?
One study looked at how VR experiences affected people's travel choices. They found that experiencing a destination in VR before making a decision actually had a positive influence on their choices.
So it sounds like VR can tap into something deeper than just visual information. What's going on there?
It's all about emotional engagement. Think about it. Reading a travel brochure is one thing, but virtually stepping onto a beach, feeling the sand, hearing the waves, that's a whole other experience. VR can activate that visceral response in a way that traditional media just can't, and that emotional connection can really drive our decisions.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about experiencing a place, not just seeing it. You mentioned the concept of mental imagery when we were prepping for this deep dive. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so mental imagery is that incredible ability of our minds to create sensory experiences, even when the actual stimuli aren't present. So even if you're not actually standing on that tropical beach, your mind can can still conjure up the sights, the sounds, even the smells based on past experiences, or even just your imagination. VR has this amazing ability to amplify that mental imagery.
So by activating these perceptual memories in our brains, VR can trigger stronger emotional responses, and that could potentially influence our decisions on a deeper level.
Exactly. And it's not just travel decisions. Research using VR in supermarkets has shown that there's a strong link between mental imagery, positive emotions, and purchasing behavior.
So it's almost like VR can create these mental shortcuts that bypass our logical decision making and speak directly to our emotions. That's powerful stuff. Um, I know we have a lot more to get to, but I want to make sure we have enough time to cover it all.
So moving on from shopping and mental imagery, let's explore how virtual reality is changing storytelling.
I've heard about VR films and immersive experiences, but what makes them so different from traditional storytelling?
Well, think about traditional filmmaking for a second. You've got cuts, camera angles, all sorts of techniques to guide the viewer's attention. The director is essentially shaping how you experience the story.
So they kind of control what you see and how you experience it.
Exactly, but in VR, the viewer has a lot more agency. You can look around, explore the virtual environment, and sometimes even influence the narrative.
That's amazing. But I imagine that freedom must also create some challenges for the storytellers.
Oh, absolutely. It's a completely different approach. One study actually looked at the impact of cuts in VR storytelling. They found that the number of cuts really influences how much agency the viewer feels, their sense of presence, and how immersed they are in the story.
So too many cuts and it starts to feel like a regular movie. You lose that feeling of actually being in the story world.
Exactly, you're right. You go back to being a passive observer. But on the other hand, no cuts at all can be disorienting and make it hard to follow the story. It's a tricky balance.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between uh, guiding the viewer but also giving them freedom to explore. Have you seen any examples of VR storytelling that you think really strike that balance?
There are lots of creators out there experimenting with different approaches. One study described this VR film called Epitome of Time that used augmented reality as part of the experience.
Wait, AR inside a VR film? How does that even work?
Okay, so imagine you're watching this VR film, totally immersed in the virtual world, and then at certain points, you're prompted to view the scene through your smartphone.
So you hold your phone up in front of your VR headset.
Exactly. And when you do, you suddenly see these AR elements on top of the VR environment. So like birds might start flying around, or these figures might appear as if they're part of the virtual world.
Wow, that's a really clever way to add interactivity and surprise.
Yeah.
That must be quite an experience. What were the filmmakers hoping to achieve with that?
They wanted to break away from those traditional storytelling frameworks and create a more active and engaging experience for the viewer. It's about blurring the lines between reality and virtuality, and even between the audience and the performance.
That's what's so cool about immersive tech, right? It pushes the boundaries of how we experience things and opens up all these new possibilities. Speaking of possibilities, let's talk about education. I can already imagine how powerful VR could be in education, but I'm curious to hear about some specific examples.
VR is really making a difference in science education, especially in fields that deal with complex or abstract concepts. One study looked at how VR was used to increase engagement and learning in, believe it or not, nuclear physics.
Nuclear physics. That sounds really tough to teach, even with technology. How did VR help with that?
Well, VR lets students see things that would be impossible to see in real life and to do it safely. They can see how atoms interact or even explore the inside of a nuclear reactor, all within a controlled virtual space.
Wow, it's like a field trip to the subatomic level. It's amazing. Are there any other areas in education where VR is showing a lot of promise?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Law schools are now using VR simulations to give students really realistic scenarios where they can practice skills like negotiation, advocacy, and ethical decision making.
So instead of just reading about legal cases, they can actually step into them and experience those situations firsthand.
Exactly, and they can learn from their mistakes without any real world consequences. It's a really valuable tool for building those practical skills.
It makes you wonder how many other fields could benefit from that kind of immersive learning.
Oh, the applications are huge. VR is being used for everything from, training surgeons to helping people get over phobias. And it's not just for students either. VR is also being used to upskill professionals in all kinds of fields.
I'm really interested in how professionals are using this tech.
Mm.
Are there any examples that really stand out?
Well, say computer programming, for example. There are VR programs that are designed to create these interactive environments that mimic real-world work scenarios.
So programmers can practice their skills and work through problems in a setting that feels real.
Exactly. And they can even get feedback and guidance from virtual mentors. It's like having a personalized learning experience.
It's like having a coding boot camp right there in your living room.
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier, but I'd love to dig deeper into how VR is being used to create virtual cities.
Researchers are creating these incredibly detailed and realistic 3D virtual cities. And they're not just for entertainment or virtual tourism.
I'm fascinated by this idea. What are some of the practical uses of these virtual cities?
Well, they can be used to test out urban planning ideas, to simulate what might happen in a natural disaster, and even to create personalized experiences for
It's like a
residents.
digital sandbox for city planners and architects, right?
Yeah.
They can experiment with designs and see how they affect things like traffic flow or how people move around,
Yeah.
all without having to make those changes in the real world.
Exactly. They can see how their designs might affect the environment, how many people live there, and even how livable the city is overall.
It's like a crystal ball for urban development.
Hmm.
And you mentioned personalized experiences for residents. What would that look like?
Imagine being able to virtually explore your new neighborhood before you move in, or test out different routes before you even leave your house. Virtual cities can provide that kind of detail and personalized information.
That would be so helpful for anyone moving to a new city or even just exploring different areas in their own city. It takes the guesswork out of so much.
And they can be used to help people get involved in their community. Imagine attending virtual town hall meetings and giving your feedback on proposed developments all from your own home.
That would completely change how we participate in our communities. It makes it so much more accessible and convenient for everyone. With all these exciting applications, it's hard not to be optimistic about the future of VR. But I do wonder about the potential downsides. What are some of the concerns around this technology?
That's a really important question. One of the biggest concerns is consumer privacy, especially with how much data these technologies can gather about our behavior and what we like.
It's a valid concern, especially as these technologies become more advanced and more integrated into our lives.
And augmented reality in particular raises a lot of privacy issues. There was a study that looked at the development of something called the Augmented Reality Information Privacy Concerns Scale, or ARIPC. This scale highlights some of the key areas where AR could potentially affect our privacy.
What are some of the specific concerns they're looking at with this ARPC scale?
Well, it looks at things like how data is collected, how transparent companies are about how that data is used, how much control we have over our personal information, and the potential for unwanted exposure. It also looks at how AR might influence or even bias how we see reality.
That's a really interesting point. How could AR potentially um, bias our view of reality?
Well, think back to those AR filters we were talking about. They
Hmm.
can subtly change our appearance, which can affect how we see ourselves and how other people see us. It raises questions about authenticity and the potential for manipulation.
It's a good reminder that even technologies that seem harmless can have consequences we don't expect. We need to be aware of those potential impacts as we embrace these new technologies.
Definitely. The study emphasized the importance of what they called a privacy calculus, where
Oh.
users weigh the benefits of using AR against the possible risks to their privacy. It's a balancing act we'll all need to navigate as AR becomes a bigger part of our lives.
Speaking of balancing acts, you mentioned the Proteus effect earlier. Can you explain that a bit more and how it relates to how we act in virtual worlds?
Sure, the Proteus effect is this fascinating phenomenon where how our avatars look in virtual worlds can actually change how we see ourselves and how we behave.
Yeah.
It can even affect our real world interactions.
So if I create an avatar that's more confident than I am in real life, I might actually start acting more confident in the real world too.
Yeah, exactly. It might seem counterintuitive, but research suggests that our virtual experiences can have a real impact on how we think and act in the physical world. It shows how connected our virtual and real selves really are.
That's a lot to think about. We really need to be mindful of how we're using these technologies and how they might be influencing us, both consciously and subconsciously. Now, before we move on to our final part, I want to go back to the idea of virtual cities for a minute.
Sure. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, you talked about the concept of VR readiness when we were discussing developing these virtual cities. Can you tell me more about what that means?
VR readiness is all about making sure that these virtual environments are designed to give the user a truly immersive and seamless experience. It's not just about creating virtual cities that look impressive. It's about making sure they work well technically and feel believable to the user.
So it's about optimizing these virtual worlds for the people who are going to be experiencing them.
Exactly. One study actually looked at how different virtual city designs performed. Specifically, they were looking at the size of the city tiles that were used to build the environment.
City tiles, what are those?
Think of them as the building blocks of the virtual city. They're the individual units that are used to create the whole environment. What they found was that smaller city tiles actually made for smoother performance and a more seamless experience for the user.
So it's like they were optimizing the virtual city to make sure the VR headsets could handle it and create a more immersive experience.
Right, and they also found that adding realistic details to the virtual city, like pedestrians, traffic, parked cars, even trees, help to increase that feeling of presence and make the experience more engaging overall.
So it's all about making a virtual world that feels as real and immersive as possible.
That's the goal, to transport people to these new worlds and experiences that feel just as real as the physical world.
And with all the possibilities we've talked about today, it seems like we're well on our way to doing just that.
Yeah, we've really only just scratched the surface of what immersive tech can do. There's still so much to explore.
I'm ready to keep exploring. Let's move on to our final part and see what other insights we can uncover. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground, from how immersive tech is changing shopping and learning to the ethical considerations and all of that. But I feel like we're just getting started.
I agree, and what's exciting is that this tech isn't just about, creating these flashy experiences.
Yeah.
It can actually solve real-world problems. It can really improve our lives in meaningful ways.
Yeah, that's what I find most exciting about this field. Using tech not just to escape reality, but to actually enhance it. Are there any examples that really show that idea?
Definitely. One area where we see that happening is in architecture and design.
Yeah.
One study looked at how VR affects spatial understanding, especially for people who aren't architects or designers themselves.
So helping clients to better understand the designs that their architects are presenting, that seems really practical.
Exactly. They compared how well people understood the space in a real apartment versus a virtual model of that same apartment.
Oh, that's interesting. So what did they find? Were people better at understanding the space when they were using VR?
Actually, there wasn't a huge difference in how well they understood the space objectively between the two. They were able to estimate measurements pretty accurately in both the real apartment and the virtual one.
So VR didn't necessarily make them better at judging, like distances and sizes?
Not in a purely objective way, but here's the key thing. People who experienced the apartment in VR felt more confident about their estimations, especially with complex or unfamiliar objects.
So it's like VR gave them a better intuitive sense of the space, even if they couldn't really put it into words.
Exactly. The researchers think this is because VR lets people use their own bodies as a reference point. They
Yeah.
can move around, look up and down, and really get a feel for the scale and proportions of the space.
It's not just seeing the space. It's like you're really there.
Yeah, and that feeling of actually being there seems to lead to a greater sense of understanding and confidence.
That could be a game changer for design.
Mm.
It could help bridge the gap between the architect's vision and the client's understanding.
Right, and it could also have implications for education and training. Imagine students experiencing historical events or scientific phenomena firsthand, or doctors practicing complex procedures in a safe virtual setting. The possibilities are endless.
Okay, I'm starting to see the big picture here. Immersive tech isn't just about entertainment or escape. It's a powerful tool for understanding the world, for being more creative, and for connecting with other people in new ways.
It's about giving us the power to shape the future. We have these amazing tools, and it's really up to us how we use them.
So why should our listeners care about immersive tech?
Because it's not some futuristic concept anymore. It's already shaping how we shop, how we learn, how we design our cities, how we interact with each other.
And as this tech gets more and more advanced, it's only going to have a bigger impact on our lives.
Absolutely. So, be curious, explore, find out how immersive tech can make your world better. Pay attention to how it makes you feel, how it changes your perspective, and how it helps you to create and connect in new ways.
That's a great call to action. We've covered a lot in this deep dive, but like you said, we've only just begun to explore this. It's a field that's constantly changing. There are so many possibilities, and I, for one, am really excited to see what the future holds.
Me too. And who knows, maybe we'll even see you, our listener, shaping that future.
That's a great thought to leave our listeners with.